So where I'm going to start today is with the three R's. I'm going to ask for some audience participation here. So when we start with our first number R, and for table 10, you might need to help them out with this, but our first R is that we have a revelation of God to man. Now, you've had the chance to talk around yourselves about last week's teaching, and so I want to find out what kind of revelations you found. I particularly found that God is an organized God. He is very much into organization. And so when we talk about revealing himself, what that means is basically what is his character? What is it that he is showing us about himself? So I'm going to ask out here in the audience, and Janaea, wherever you are. Oh, you've got it? Okay. So Jenny has a microphone, and she's going to come around, and I would like to hear at your tables what you found as far as God revealing himself this week. Over here.
Thank you. That he was organized, but it was to show his holiness, and that it was teaching Israel how to honor God.
Very good. Yes, it was showing his holiness. That's a character of God, is that he is holy. He's set apart. Good. Any others? Anybody else see a different revealing over here?
Not only was God a God of organization, but he cared about individuals. All these men's and these tribes' names are written down for time and eternity in Scripture for us to remember. And it's like, remember from where you came. And when I became later dedicated my life to the Lord, I said, God, help me to always remember from where I came so I can identify with those whom I meet later on. And the other thing is, am I prepared at a moment's notice to break camp?
Very good. All right. Okay, so we're going to move on to the second R, which, say it with me, ladies, is rebellion, right? Rebellion of man against God. Now, I didn't particularly see any obvious rebellion by the men. They seemed to be kind of obedient to what Moses was asking, but did anyone else see any rebellion of man? Raise your hand if you've got something you saw. Okay, Terrell.
Indirectly, we see the rebellion of man because of the laws that had to be made about infidelity and all of those things.
Okay, very good. All right, and let's go for the last R, which is redemption, yes, of man back to God. And what I kind of saw there was this, not so much of an actual redemption taking place, but the preparation that he knew that there was going to be sin and there needed to be redemption. So that's what I found. Let's hear from some ladies. Anything that you found that is different than that? Show of hands. All hearts clear? Okay. Oh, here we have one. Eileen has something to say.
That the tabernacle was situated in the very center of society, and that God has a way of, wants us to recognize that he's in the center of our life. And he even gave them a visual with the pillars of cloud and the fire, so that they would see that he's right there with them.
Very good. Thank you. Okay, so the next thing on, we have another one. Yay.
That the priestly blessing.
The priestly blessing,
yes,
very
because
good.
Because we all know that blessing, that we've heard that over and over.
Yes.
So that was very special.
That is very redeeming to my heart when I hear it.
Yes.
Yeah, good job. Okay, so moving on is that I also noticed as I am going to be going into the next lesson that there are some themes that you're going to find. And so I'm just going to point those out to you here. The first one is that God hears us. Now, do we need to have a 120 decibel trumpet to blow to get God's attention? No. And by the way, 120 decibels is the typical sound level of noise at a rock concert. So it could be very loud. But no, we don't have to do that. God can hear us in our smallest whispers. And you're going to hear about that as we read through this next lesson. The next theme that I have for you is that there is pessimism over the conditions and the future. That's why I was saying that in this heat I have some optimism, because the opposite of that is pessimism. Pessimism is typically analogized by the glass being half full and half empty. It's basically your thought processes, your perception of, how life is. So you're going to see some pessimism in this book, or this chapters that we're going to see. The third theme is a view of the intimate relationship between the Lord and Moses. And it's a beautiful picture. It's this relationship of give and take. The Lord has things that he is feeling. He is a person. He has feelings. And Moses, who kind of counteracts that. And then there's times when Moses is having some severe feelings, and God takes care of that. So the most beautiful part about this is that we as Christians can have a relationship with our God just as intimate. The fourth theme is you're going to see that there will be acting out of human nature's pride, selfishness, jealousy, greed, lust for power, and unfortunately, a disregard for the will of God. This session, I have decided to include some key verses. And if you look in Numbers, where am I? 14, 26 through 35, and just read those. Because I know some of you, like this last week, weren't able to get all your reading done. But please, just try and read that, because I think it sums up this lesson pretty well. Of course, if you do have time and you want to spend time with God, of course, make sure you read the whole thing, but make sure to focus on that as well. So let's continue our journey through Bamidbar. You're looking at me, Bamidbar. Oh, I think I remember. That's a Hebrew word. Wilderness. Good, I heard it. In wilderness. That's what that means in Hebrew, and actually that was the title that is in Hebrew, it still is, the title for this book. And I think it describes the book much clearer than the title of Numbers. So, starting with chapter 10, we're going to talk about trumpets. And specifically, the silver trumpets. But I also want to talk about, and here we have the silver trumpets, I want to talk about the shofar. We learned about the shofar when we studied Leviticus. And that is more of a horn. It's the horn that is made from an animal's horn, and it kind of has a little curl, and you've probably seen pictures that have this big long one that really curls. And where that came from was as a symbol of the ram in the thicket. If you remember, Isaac was being sacrificed by Abraham, and then he saw the ram in the thicket. So that's where a shofar comes in as far as some symbolism. The people that are allowed to use the shofar is anybody. So anybody can blow a shofar. Now, back to our silver trumpets, the only ones who are allowed to blow those horns were the priests. And the symbolism for a silver trumpet is redemption. In the Jewish tradition, when we have the Feast of Trumpets, they actually used both types of trumpets. Now, there was a practical purpose for these silver trumpets, and it was used as a means for communication. Today, of course, we can use cell phones, but they didn't have those back then. And when you've got over 2 million people in a camp, you're going to need something to be able to communicate with. So, these horns were used in 4 types of signals. 3 of them were actual alarms. And as far as the alarms, there's 3 of those. The first alarm would be to assemble or get together at the front of the tent of meeting, and Moses would give out what information he needed to give out. The second was to move. Now, we learned last week that there was a cloud that came down and settled on the tabernacle, and that meant that they were supposed to stay in that particular spot. But when the cloud lifted, they were to move. Well, to kind of notify everybody and make sure that the first ones out, of course, we know were Judah's tribe, they needed to head out. So to kind of give them that go button, they used the trumpet. The third alarm was for battle. We know that God knew that there was going to be fighting, and so he was preparing for that for when they entered the land of Canaan, and indeed the trumpets were used, and that would be these silver trumpets that were loud and clear. That's why they're kind of built differently than the shofar. Now, the fourth signal is for rejoicing. And that to me is just, I can't imagine what it must have sounded like. That when there was the alarm for like assembly, it was a long boo, but for rejoicing, there could be just little staccatos. And so I can't imagine what that probably sounds like. During the festivals, the silver trumpets were to be used, some of them, not all of them. And then also over when they had the burnt offering, the burnt offerings or even the peace offerings, they also blew the silver horns. Now, many Christians have commonly linked, their thought process when they hear the word trumpet to Revelations, and indeed you will find it there. But this trumpet also typifies, depends on how you want to say that, the preaching of the gospel, which is an alarm to sinners. You'll find in Matthew 24:31 and Joel 2:1. Sure. Matthew 24:31, Joel 2:1. So moving on from Sinai to Kadesh. They're starting to travel now, leaving at Mount Sinai. And just after 3 days, 3 measly little days of travel, we find that there is complaining and whining. There's a mixed crowd, which means the Israelites and those foreigners that were to come along, they came along with them out of Egypt, and even Moses, who starts whining. So the crowd was complaining about meat. We know from Leviticus that they were given all that wonderful manna to eat, but no, that's not enough. We're going to start complaining that we need meat. We had fish in Egypt, we had cucumbers, all these wonderful things, but now we're stuck in the desert with just manna. So, because these people are complaining and because Moses is the one who is supposed to be leading and being responsible for these people, he talks to God, and when he talks to him, he is whining. He is saying, "Oh, Lord, why? Why did you put me in charge of these people? Just kill me. Kill me now." And so God responds. God's response to the crowd is that he is going to give them quail. That's going to be their meat. Okay, and I think we've got a picture up here. He gives them quail. So they've got meat, but they not only have enough meat to eat for that particular day, they've got 2 cubits deep. That's basically a yard deep of quail around and outside the camp there. So you are going to find out that they named this place Kivroth Ha'ata'ava. Okay, I'm going to translate that for you. It's graves of lust. So I want you to find out why they would name it such a thing. It's going to be there in your reading. You'll find it. God's response to Moses and his whining, he actually permits Moses to go ahead and choose 70 elders from the Israelites that he knows, and they'll be able to help him because they are also given the power of the Spirit. So too, we still have more complainers. Moses' siblings. Now, you never have this happen, I'm sure, in your homes. That Miriam and Aaron start to gossip and grumble about their brother Aaron. They say that he's got an Ethiopian wife. Oh my goodness. You know, na 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 na. And they grumble about, why is he the leader? Indeed, Miriam was a prophetess. She was given some nice gifts from God. So why would he be the leader? God hears them, even though they're mumbling amongst themselves. Okay, he hears everything that's happening. And he calls all 3 of them, Moses, Aaron, and Miriam, into the the tent of meeting. And he talks to them. Psalms 105:15 reveals how God wanted Moses to be treated. Do not touch my anointed ones. That sounds pretty serious. Moses was his anointed one, and Miriam and Aaron knew that. So there is a consequence, and you'll want to find out what causes this consequence to their journey of being delayed 7 days. So now they've traveled and they reach Kadesh. God tells Moses to send 12 men or 12 spies over into Cana, which is basically where they're going to be receiving that land of milk and honey that God promised. So Moses sends these 12 men and tells them to come back and report what you find within 40 days. So they are obedient. They go into the land and they kind of snoop around and find things, and they come back. And they even bring proof of what they found. They bring back grapes and fruit, and so the land is indeed a land of milk and honey. There's lots there to want. However, some of the men, 10 of them as a matter of fact, 10 decide to kind of overemphasize what they found as far as the people. They begin gossiping and spreading fear, telling the people that there are giants there from Anak, who was a giant, and it's his descendants. So the people say, oh my goodness, we can't beat them. They're too big, they're too strong, their cities are really fortified. We're not going to go into the land that God has asked us to do and that has provided for us. So God gets pretty frustrated. He builds up such frustration that he gets to the point where he tells Moses, I'm going to strike them down. And Moses talks to him and makes sure that he uses a little bit more reasoning, and he tells him to remember the Abrahamic covenant. He also reminds him that the other nations are watching what's happening to the Israelites, and that if here is this holy God, the God of the universe, and he chooses these people and then he wipes them out, that's not going to look too good for evangelizing across the world. So God forgives, but he does provide a punishment. The Israelites were told that because they are refusing God, that they are going to have to wander in the wilderness, in this hot, hot desert, for the next 38 years at that point. So for 40 years, they will be in the desert. And that correlates with the 40 days that the spies had gone down in to investigate. And not only will they have to wander, but God foretold that there would be a death in the wilderness for this entire first generation that came up out of Egypt. Except for 2 of the spies. You notice he sent 12 and only 10 came back when he was spreading the gossip. Joshua and Caleb came back and they said, no, it's not true that, they aren't so great. They're not so powerful. They're not, that big. We can fight them. We can fight them with our God. Our God has more power than they have. But unfortunately, the people actually wanted to stone Joshua to death. So that's how intense their feelings were about not going into the land. You'll find in your reading that they do something that isn't quite right after that. But I want you to look at that for yourself. God gives us an update for what should transpire when they do reach the promised land. And one of them is that for defiantly sinning, for example, if somebody's blaspheming about God, they are to be cut off from the nation. He also tells us a story about somebody who does not observe the Sabbath, and there's a severe consequence for that. And he gives us one more command, and that is that you need to have tassels on the 4 corners of your garment. The Jews still, to this day, use these, and they are called, let me show you, down here. These are the tassels. They're called tzitzit. And this garment here is what they call a tallit. So that's that shawl that they put over and they pray. But this is just an undergarment that this gentleman is wearing, and he's still got the tzitzit on there. I was pretty interested in what a tzitzit might look like. And so I actually went on the internet and found out how to make it. It's pretty easy, but it does have regulations on how long it should be, what colors the thread is, and also what I think is interesting is there are 5 knots, which correlates to the 5 books in the Torah. So it's just a little piece of information. And also what the tzitzit does is, like you can tie it on his belt loop, you see him there, is that it's to remind you of God's commands. And I wore one on my pants one day, and it just kind of hit me as I walked. And so I can see how beneficial that would be to just have something, kind of like wearing a rubber band to remember God. So this next picture, a lot of people will maybe recognize that as the woman that had the curse of blood and kind of looks like maybe Jesus there, and that looks like the tzitzit. In Hebrew, tzitzit actually means feather. And if you look at this, yep, kind of looks like a feather. The title of this particular picture is healing in his wings. So I thought that was pretty appropriate. Now, at the end of this chapter, you're going to also hear God. You've heard God say this a lot in some of your readings, is that he says, I am the Lord your God. And when I read that, it just kind of reminded me of your parents when they say, you know, why do I need to do this? Because I'm the mom. I said so. So that's just kind of what it reminded me of. The next portion that I'm going to talk about is when a resistance arises and tries to take over the nation. There is a group formed against Moses and Aaron, and it's led by a Levite named Korah. Moses tries talking to the leaders, but they are so insolent. So Moses challenges them with a test to see who God wanted as his leaders. Now, you're going to want to find out the details on your own about this because I don't have enough time. But you're going to see a hint up here on the screen of what happens. Now, the survivors following this event end up grumbling about, oh no, we're all going to be killed off. So again, there's something else that's going to happen, and I'm not going to tell you what it is. You need to read about it and find out for yourselves. But I am going to let you know that Aaron becomes the hero, and he does something to save the complete eradication of the Israelites. Now, God told Moses to conduct one more test, and this was to gather the staffs of the leaders of each of the tribes. So the 12 tribes all brought their staffs together, had their names on it, and Moses took it into the Holy of Holies. He said that he is going to ask God to do something that will show them who the priest is that God wants to have. So he brings in all these staffs, puts them in the Holy of Holies, and when he goes in the next morning, he brings out the staffs. They're all just basically sticks, except one. That one not only has the little buds, you know, on branches, how they get those little buds, not only has the little buds, but it has flowers and actual almonds on it. And you can probably guess whose staff that was. It was Aaron's. So God was confirming that he wanted Aaron to be their high priest. So Aaron's office as a priest was attested to by the resurrection of a staff. More importantly, Christ is our high priest, and his resurrection from the dead is how we know that. This week wraps up with reading the Levites' inheritance. Now, you've probably heard that there's going to be the land divided out in the promised land between all the different tribes, but the tribe of Judah does not get a piece of the land, but they do get to be in that inner circle with the Lord in close proximity to him, and they will be serving him. They will also receive his tithes, which they in turn will tithe, as well as be able to eat the food from the offerings that they give. Next week, we're going to catch up with a few more wild experiences that took place while traveling Bamidbar. Okay, I think that's my cue for telling you to go ahead and assemble yourselves at your tables and pray. Thank you.